Day 39 of the war in Gaza with Hamas, the IDF is moving to fully capture remaining Hamas strongholds in Gaza City. In a symbolic defeat for Hamas and victory for Israel, IDF troops have taken over the Hamas parliament. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Day 39 of the war finds the IDF in near total control of Gaza City, the capital of the terrorist enclave that had been ruled until recent days by Hamas. Defense Minister Gallant said Hamas has lost control in northern Gaza as the IDF moves to end remaining resistance in Gaza City. An image circulating on social media shows IDF troops of the Golani Brigade inside Gaza's parliament building in the terrorist capital after capturing the site. The Palestinian Legislative Council building in Gaza served Hamas lawmakers since the terror group's takeover of the Strip in 2007. The IDF says the terrorists are fleeing south. Civilians are looting Hamas bases amid growing realization that the terrorist rule is coming to an end, with Israeli forces advancing according to plan. The defense minister rejected reports of a potential ceasefire and said there is no stopwatch. Israel's goal is to remove Hamas and will achieve its goal. The IDF killed a number of Hamas commanders in airstrikes in the Gaza Strip over the past day. The IDF said troops also entered the residence of a senior Islamic Jihad terrorist and found a large number of weapons, ammunition, and combat equipment, as well as photos of Iranian leaders.
בביתו של ראש מערך החימוש של הג'יהאד האסלאמי, החטיבה הצפונית, מצאנו חימוש רב, וסטים של לחימה, מדי לחימה טקטיים, ובנוסף
Meanwhile, Hamas' ability to fire rockets at Israel has been severely depleted, but not eliminated until now. Incoming rocket sirens were sounded in central Israel, including Tel Aviv, in what was the first long-range rocket attack from the Gaza Strip since Friday.
And international pressure is building toward a ceasefire in Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. That's the word from Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, who insisted that Israel will complete the job of ending Hamas's rule. Meanwhile, former UN Ambassador Danon, together with MK Ram Ben Barak, penned a joint article in the Wall Street Journal calling on Western countries to take in Palestinian refugees. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Israel is facing growing pressure to halt or curb its Gaza operation rise significantly within the next few weeks. That's the view of Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, who said diplomatic pressure had begun to increase and that the diplomatic window for the IDF campaign in Gaza will likely remain open for another 2 or 3 weeks before it becomes significant. Such pressure would include demands for a ceasefire or only greater action to aid civilians in the Strip. Cohen insisted that Israel is determined to continue with combat operations until it reaches its goals for the war, to eliminate Hamas and return the hundreds of hostages it holds. Meanwhile, in a diplomatic win, the 27 European Union nations have jointly condemned Hamas for the terror group's use of hospitals and civilians as human shields in war against Israel.
We condemn the use of Hamas as hospitals and people as human shields, and on the other hand, we ask Israel for maximum restraint and targeting in order to avoid human casualties.
And on Tuesday morning, 2 Knesset members from both the opposition and the coalition penned a joint column in the Wall Street Journal calling for the voluntary relocation of Gaza's Arabs to the international community. Former Israeli UN Ambassador Danon from Likud and Ram Ben Barak from Yesh Atid argue that Gaza is a global responsibility and call for the formulation of a plan that will allow a massive movement of refugees who desire to relocate from the Gaza Strip to countries that will agree to resettle them.
And joining us now with more on the call for the responsibility of Gaza's civilians by the international community is Likud MK and former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lidar.
So what is the motivation or reasoning behind your call for Western countries to accept Gazan civilians who are seeking to relocate?
So I think when we look at conflicts all around the world, you realize that when you have a conflict, you have problems, humanitarian issues, and many people choose to move to different locations. It happened in the past in Europe. It happened recently in Ukraine, in Syria. You know, if you take Syria, for example, more than 8 million people left Syria, 1.5 left to Jordan, 3 million fled to Turkey, and many were accepted by European and other countries all around the world. I think we should start talking about the possibility that the international community will offer Gazans who want to move, and I make it very clear, we are not forcing anyone, but those who want to move and to open a different chapter of their life in a better place will have that possibility in different countries to receive financial support for the international community. I think it will be helpful for those who will move, but also for those who will stay. Because when you look at Gaza today, in terms of the situation, the economical prospects for the future, it's not promising.
And, you know, Israel is the only country in the world that is being called upon to help its enemies during the time of war. I mean, this is a double standard that we've seen time and again. And meanwhile, Arab countries and international countries have refused to take in any Palestinians. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, first I want to make a point regarding the humanitarian issues. And I ask, you know, whenever I'm being interviewed, what about our humanitarian issues? What about our families of the hostages? What about the families of the victims? You know, the war was an unprovoked attack against Israel. So we shouldn't forget our humanitarian needs. And I agree with you. I think, Lidar, that we should tell the Arab countries, you know, we saw a very impressive meeting of the Arab League that met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. You know, they all came with private jets, you know, dozens of leaders. You know, maybe each one of them will actually think about allowing a few thousand Gazans to go back to their country. I think that's the appropriate thing to do.
And where is the UN? Where is UNRWA in all of this? UNRWA, an organization solely dedicated to the Palestinians. You know, we've also seen a lot of evidence now with videos and testimonials coming out of Gaza that so much of the international aid and even UN infrastructure was used for terror activities. So countries today are maybe not bringing in refugees, but are once again pledging to donate millions to Gaza. So, you know, did the international community not learn from its mistakes? And how can Israel ensure that this money won't end up right back in the hands of Hamas or another terrorist organization?
So first we have to admit that the UN is not functioning. And the Secretary General of the UN, he chose to become the spokesperson of Hamas in the last months. You know, the ridiculous statements and allegations against Israel, the justification he mentioned regarding the attack on October 7th, that's shameful. And UNRWA, you know, they don't really want to solve the issue of the Palestinians. They want to keep them where they are. And when you look at the billions of dollars they spent over the years, and you ask yourself what they achieved with so much money, basically nothing. So I think it's time for new ideas, and it's time for new organizations to evolve and to deal with the issue of the Palestinians, not UNRWA.
And at the end of the day, you know, the 2 million or so Palestinians are going to remain in Gaza in large numbers. So what is the plan for the day after the war?
So I can tell you what we don't want to see, and we should not allow it to happen. We don't want to see Hamas there at all. Not civilian Hamas, not military Hamas for sure. It should be demilitarized area without the capability of building rockets and any kind of weapons. I think we should have the freedom to protect ourselves like we have in Judea and Samaria. So if we have to go in to operate to protect ourselves, we will keep that freedom. We have no intention to run the daily lives of the Palestinians in Gaza. And I think for that, the international community will have to step in, maybe together with some regional players, and build some kind of mechanism to support the population in Gaza.
All right, MK Danny Danon, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much, Lida.
And moving on, Rantisi Hospital in Gaza was used by terrorists as a safe haven after the October 7th massacres. And the IDF suspects that Israeli hostages were held at the site. More in this report from ILTV's William Sharon.
IDF Navy Elite Shayetet 13 Commando Unit and the 401st Armored Brigade have raided and captured Gaza cities, evacuated Rantisi Hospital, where Hamas operatives were held up. IDF spokesman Hagari personally visited the site to explain his findings.
This is Rantisi Hospital. And this is the place where I showed you the tunnel. I want you to see. Look at what Hamas is holding inside the hospital. I want you to understand, this kind of gear is a gear for a major fight. People shooting RPGs from hospitals. This is Hamas, firing RPGs for hospitals. The world has to understand who is Israel fighting against.
The IDF offered proof that Hamas terrorists came to the hospital after the October 7th massacre.
They were all used in the massacre of the 7th of October. They even have bullets in this motorcycle. So they came back from the massacre on the 7th of October.
The IDF suspects that it found a room where hostages were held.
You're now entering into the room where we suspect the hostages were being held. I want you to look at this room. People are putting curtains with nothing above, just wall. No reason to put here a curtain unless you want to film hostages and deliver movies.
This is proof that the hospital was connected to a terror tunnel.
The tunnel is let down more than 20 meters down. The rowboat found a door that is bulletproof. It's explosives proof, so it looks like a hard evidence, a clear evidence that the hospital direction is connected.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And in more tragic news, on Tuesday, the IDF announced the death of 19-year-old IDF lookout Noah Marziano, who had been abducted by Hamas on October 7th and held in Gaza. The announcement came after late Monday night, Hamas had released a video of Marziano in its latest form of psychological warfare. Meanwhile, the remains of Vivian Silver, a 74-year-old Canadian-Israeli peace activist, were found in her home in Kibbutz Be'eri, confirming she was murdered during the October 7th massacre. Silver was presumed to have been abducted and held hostage by Hamas. Her family, however, confirmed Tuesday that forensics identified her via her DNA. Silver was a known peace activist who founded Women Wage Peace and was a director of the Arab Jewish Center for Empowerment, Equality, and Cooperation, which promoted joint community projects between Israel and Gaza. Yet she was not spared by Hamas. And on Tuesday, the Washington Post cited an unnamed Israeli official saying that a hostage deal was forthcoming. Hamas said it told Qatari mediators that it was ready to release 70 hostages, women and children, in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire with Israel. Though whether this is the latest psychological warfare tactic still remains unclear. And in other news, the cross-border provocations from Hezbollah have been continuing and intensifying on the Lebanese frontier, prompting Israel to now reconsider its strategy after more than a month of deadly exchanges. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Israel is now reconsidering its strategy after more than a month of deadly cross-border exchanges with Hezbollah. That's the word from IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi after an assessment at the Northern Command in Tzfat, vowing to restore security to residents of northern Israel amid the surge in rocket and missile attacks from Lebanon by Hezbollah. Halevi said that the IDF has action plans for the north and vowed the security situation will not remain with residents of the north feeling unsafe to return to their homes. The northern border communities have been almost entirely evacuated of civilians. Israel has shown considerable restraint until now, punishing Hezbollah with local reprisals while trying to avoid a full-scale conflict on a second front. More than 80 Hezbollah terrorists have been killed in Israeli reprisals. The IDF says Halevi approved plans of action and instructed the Northern Command to maintain a high level of readiness for any eventuality. While fighting a war in Gaza, Israel is considering whether to continue showing restraint or intensify its response and risk a full-scale conflict on two fronts. This week has experienced further escalation along the northern border and further south, including rocket fire reaching Akko and the Krayot. In response, the IDF struck a Hezbollah launch site in southern Lebanon and hit an operative who fired projectiles at Israel. An IDF tank shelled an anti-tank missile cell near Shtula, and the IDF also responded with artillery shelling toward the sources of the fire in each incident. Meanwhile, the U.S. has released video of a reported airstrike on a weapons storage facility in Maysulun, Syria. The U.S. military has carried out a number of strikes in Syria in recent days. They have come after at least 40 attacks against U.S. and coalition troops in Iraq and Syria by Iran-backed forces since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the latest airstrikes in Syria targeted facilities used by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps.
And joining us now with the latest developments on the front from reserve duty is Dr. Nir Bohms, fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center in Tel Aviv University and an expert in the Middle East. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
So I actually want to start with the northern front. We've seen an escalation in the missiles launched from Hezbollah over the past few days from southern Lebanon. What is your estimate? Is Hezbollah considering increasing its response and fully entering this war?
Well, I think Hezbollah is considering some courses of action and is trying to maneuver between its own base and the commitment to the Mukawama, the axis of resistance, and the understanding that if it joins this war, it may face something that may be too difficult for them to digest. Especially when the Americans are here with significant force and with a clear intention to potentially intervene if this conflict grows. Hezbollah may have underestimated something. The broader theory that Israel is a spider web, that Israel is in a crisis, that Israel is weak and it will really burst from within, exploded very, very quickly when this war began and when all the protest groups in Israel had moved from encouraging reservists and pilots not to serve to serving the IDF and given all the support because of the existential threat that this country had faced.
And yet, strategically speaking, how much more can the northern border take before Israel, takes real action and is not just firing back? I mean, wouldn't now be the right time to do so, as you mentioned, when Israel has international backing and the U.S. ships are in the Mediterranean supporting it?
I think that the retaliation equation will continue to develop. Israel, I think, so far had shown in the south and to some degree in the north that it's willing and able to retaliate. The American dimension is not an automatic backup for any retaliation that Israel may or may not do. And so Israel needs to also walk a thin line. But I believe that Israel will continue their responses, perhaps in more ways than one, in order to make sure that it continues to advance its objectives in the north as well. We need to distance Hezbollah, we need to dismantle Hezbollah. If we're not going to do it now with a full-fledged war, we need to dismantle some of Hezbollah's abilities and make sure that they're going to be kept away from the border. This is only the beginning of that story. The northern front is still in chapter 1, while hopefully the southern front is already moved to chapter 3 or chapter 4.
And so speaking of the southern front, turning back to Gaza, the IDF appears to have scored a series of military successes. How badly hurt is Hamas, and how far along is Israel to its goal of ending Hamas rule in Gaza?
Hamas, I think, is significantly hurt, but it's still functioning. And as long as you have leadership surrounded in the tunnels and they have some ability to respond, Hamas, is still there. The second question, of course, is how long will they be there? When can we actually call a day, particularly when so many issues remain open, including the day after and the kidnapped and captured. And so, again, we are still very much in the middle of that story. And then there's some, strategies that can be adopted. To some degree, time may be on Israel's side. The tunnels could not hold forever. without fuel. And at some point, that if Hamas would not have the types of supplies, it's going to be very difficult for the people to stay down. And that's maybe one strategy to adopt here. On the other hand, the humanitarian dimension may necessitate some additional arrangements that will at least alleviate that burden. And this is something that Israel is very much aware of. There is determination to make sure that Hamas is going to be dismantled. And then we need to figure out again whether Israel will be able to or will be forced to treat Gaza on its own for a period of time, or there's going to be another framework that will enable Israel not to do it alone, and ensure that there's going to be a day after process that will potentially provide a degree of an horizon for this very complex Israeli-Palestinian file.
All right, Dr. Nir Bohms, thank you so much for your analysis, and stay safe.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And in a show of unity and support during wartime, and despite criticism of the Prime Minister and the government, opposition leader Yair Lapid said on Monday night that he does not believe that now is the time to replace Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and deal with the issue of responsibility for the October 7th massacre and the ensuing Gaza war.
בשבועות האחרונים שאלתי את עצמי לא פעם אם זו לא האחריות שלנו לעסוק כבר עכשיו בשאלה מי צריך להוביל את המדינה בימים הקשים האלה. אני עומד מאחורי ההחלטה לחכות עם זה. עם ישראל צריך להתייצב מאוחד מול אויביו, למגר את החמאס, להחזיר הביתה את החטופים. ייתכן שלא יהיה מנוס גם מעימות עם החיזבאללה. אנחנו נמשיך לתת גיבוי לצה"ל ולמדינה, גם בארץ, גם בזירה הבינלאומית.
Still, the opposition leader cautioned the Prime Minister to not place blame, but rather to focus on winning the war and improving the government's efforts to address the socioeconomic needs of Israelis. And now, as we speak, the March for Israel is underway in Washington, D.C., which is drawing in tens of thousands of people in support of Israel. ILTV's Devo Klein has the details.
Americans from all walks of life are joining forces for the March for Israel on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The march was organized by the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. According to the organizers, the march aims to show support and solidarity with the people of Israel, to demonstrate American commitment to its most important ally in the Middle East, to condemn the rising trend of anti-Semitic violence and harassment, and to demand the immediate and safe release of all the hostages. Eric Fingerhut, the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of North America, said ahead of the march that Americans have rightly stood by Israel at this critical moment because Americans understand that Israel's fight against Hamas is no different than America's fight against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. He added that as patriotic Americans, we will gather on the National Mall to ensure that the entire world knows that America supports the people of Israel in its time of need. While William Daroff, CEO of the Conference of Presidents, said that it is imperative that America sends a resounding message of support to Israel and reject the extreme anti-Israel rhetoric and sentiment.
And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Scattered showers are expected around the country tonight with lows of around 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, mostly cloudy skies and low temperatures set to reach highs of 23 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Najar Gravei-Lazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.